A very popular question that I get is how to land when you've got a lot of uptilt on your camera. I often say more uptilt equals more awesome, more speed. And as I've gone to more uptilt, I'm starting to see some other advantages of more uptilt that I'll be talking about in other videos on the channel. But if you can't get the copter down on the ground, that's not awesome. More uptilt is not awesome if it means you can't land. So how do you land when you've got a lot of uptilt? And specifically, well, I'm going to be talking in this video about how do you land when there's so much uptilt that you can't see the ground as you're coming in for a landing. So if you can see the ground as you're coming in for a landing, it feels to me like the procedure is basically the same. And I talked about this procedure in my How to Fly a Multi-Rotor series of lessons. And it's basically you fly slowly forward, you don't hover, you reduce your throttle to establish a descent, and as you get close to the ground, you sort of pitch back to arrest your speed until everything just sort of comes together and you land. But when you can't see the ground, you've got some problems. One of the problems is that you can't judge your altitude, so you don't know when you're about to hit the ground to arrest your forward speed. And the other problem is that you kind of don't know if you're moving forward or back very easily. You might, I mean, if you were out in a flat plain state or in the desert, you might not be able to see anything but sky. And even if you can see something in the distance, like a house or a tree or a mountain or something, you don't know what's up close to you. So if you're trying to land the copter right at your feet, it's going to be pretty tricky because by the time you come into frame, you could be already crashing into yourself, and that's no good. So if you can see the ground, then you do the normal thing. And that means that depending on the camera lens you've got, you may be able to use a relatively normal landing procedure, even with a relatively large amount of uptilt. I have a friend who flies with a 2.1 millimeter camera lens on his FPV camera. And that's a 2.8 millimeter is more common, I think. I don't know. I don't know if it's more common. And maybe it's not more common. Maybe most people fly with the 2.1. But the 2.1 is kind of a fisheye lens. It's not quite a full-on fisheye, but it's pretty close. It's getting there. And it means that with 45 degrees up tilt on his camera, he can still see the ground pretty easily. And he's looked at my DVR recordings and gone, oh, no, dude, I could see the ground from there. So if you have a wide-angle lens, then you may be able to use normal landing procedures with more up tilt. But in my case, it doesn't work. I cannot see the ground when I'm coming in for a landing. And so I've had to come up with some procedures for dealing with that, and I'm going to tell you what they are. Let's get into it. So here's an example that I'm going to show you just at like a third speed so I can talk you through what I'm doing. And my goal with this example is that I want to provide myself with something that I can use as a sight reference as I'm lining up the landing. So in this case, I'm choosing this tree. The tree has a nice open area in front of it. And I'm going to line up in front of the tree, and I'm going to kind of establish a hover. I'm going to stop my forward motion, and once I've done that, I'm going to slowly reduce the throttle until I begin to descend. And then I'm just going to wait, and I'm going to kind of do it by feel. Here you can hear I've reduced the throttle. I'm coming down. And there you go. Let's watch that at full speed. If we watch that clip again, you can see that I almost hit the ground early and I have to increase the throttle to get away from it. I don't want to hit the ground until I've established a zero motion hover, and then I'm ready to reduce the throttle and descend again. So let's watch that one more time. Right here, there, I could tell I was getting too low, and so I increased the throttle to climb back up. And then I established the hover using the tree as a visual reference and land. Now I'm going to give you a couple more examples of this, just so you can see different ways that I set up the landing. But I'm always sighting off the tree, I'm establishing a hover, and then reducing throttle to come down to until I hit the ground, and I just kill the throttle. If you've been working the dead stop exercise that I've got on my channel, it's a very similar exercise to what we're talking about here. The dead stop exercise involves approaching an obstacle and then arresting your forward motion. In the case of the dead stop exercise, then you back out again and do something awesome and acrobatic. In this case, you just arrest the forward motion and then go into a hover and then reduce the throttle until you begin to descend, and then you come down. Let me show you a variant on this now. I don't know why, but I find it easier to arrest my forward motion if I'm sliding sideways than if I'm just flying forwards. And I would rather turn to the left and roll to the left and sort of skid to a stop than just pitch back and come to a stop that way. Maybe it has to do with the fact that the camera lens is wider than it is tall. So if I'm turned to the side and rolled to the side, I can see a little bit more of the ground than if I just pitch back and then I can't look down. I don't know, but in the examples I'm going to show you here, as I approach the landing, I come in, I turn to the side, and I kind of slide to a stop. And then once I see that I've come to a stop, then I sort of level out using the trees as a visual reference and land the same way as normal. I feel like this is nice for times when you're kind of coming in hot and you have to hit a smaller location. You don't necessarily have a long approach to sort of line up on a tree. Let's take a look at an example. In this example, you can see me rolling to the left and just waiting for that moment when I see my forward velocity has stopped. And then I sort of move in a little closer and approach the landing spot. But I'm coming in kind of fast, and instead of arresting my motion by just pitching back, I always want to turn toward that visual reference. Oops, hey, I'm right side up, that counts. I always want to turn toward that visual reference and arrest my velocity with regard to that reference. Alrighty, well, I hope that's been helpful. It all boils down to that you need a visual reference to tell you what the copter is doing, whether it's climbing, descending, moving forwards, backwards, or sideways. And when you can see the ground, then that's your visual reference. And when you can't see the ground, then just pick a different visual reference. I don't think that this approach is going to make it very possible or certainly not very easy to like land on a bullseye. Like when you can see the ground, you can just fly right up to your own feet, boom, set it down right in front of yourself, no problem. You could land on a target. With this way, it's a little hard to tell where exactly you're landing, but at least you can set the copter down somewhat gracefully. Let's face it, it doesn't do the copter any harm when we land and we sort of tumble it over, but it certainly doesn't look good, right? And it doesn't feel good to me. I like to set it down in a nice, graceful landing and look like I know what I'm doing. And for those of you who are saying, why don't you just put it in auto level mode and land it that way? Ha, ha. No, no, no. No accelerometers on this copter. I turn them off. I have nothing to do with accelerometers. Gyros only. Pure gyro. That's right. Okay. I hope that's helpful. Happy flying.